Okay, now it's time to talk about trend charts. Let's control click into the trend charts. This is going to be our starting point, and where we're hoping to end up is you can control click on like check mark next to trend charts and see what we're going to be trying to build. So let's go back to trend charts and let's cover some theory first. Generally speaking, trend charts are fairly simple, and the basic one requires very little to get going. So if you click on this trend charts, you will see that there's several options that are available to us to build a chart. The most important one is axis. That's where the time attribute goes, or date attribute goes. We have a legend, we'll cover that later. Revenue, Y2 for the second axis, and then tooltips. Basically, these are all the options we have, and the two that we have to build the trend charts are the axis and the values. So here we're starting with a pre-built chart. So I've brought the date attribute into the axis, I've brought the revenue measure into the values, and now we can see our trend over time. One of the things I could do is add another variable to our chart. So I could grab revenue line item, bring it below my revenue, and now you're gonna see both values. So you're able to see the revenue for this year and the revenue for last year as you mouse over on the chart. If you would like to delete a variable from the chart, again, you could just click on the X next to the name of the metrics and the variable will go away. To make it a little bit easier for people to understand what it is we're trending without having to mouse over, it's a good idea to click on a paintbrush or format option, go into the title, and populate and type in the title. In this case, I'm just saying revenue trend line chart, but you could say revenue, costs, and so forth. So that when a user is looking at the chart, they have an idea of what it is that we're trying to show. As I said, we can show more than one line on a trend chart, and one of the ways to do this is just to drag another metric into the values area. In our case, what we want to do with the second chart is let's take a look at what the ask is. We want to do a revenue trend by division. So we still want to show the revenue, just one variable revenue, but we want to show two different divisions in this chart. So let's see how we can achieve that. So if I click on the second chart, I can see that only the revenue is brought into the values column. So a few things are missing. So in order for us to build a trend to begin with, we gotta grab the date attribute, pull it into the axis. So now we see the identical trend. And now what we want to do is we want to grab our division from the division table and drag it over into the legend. So now for every value in the division attribute, so in my case we only have two divisions, green and red, but in your case you would be doing trends by department or by business units or by product. So for every unique value in that dimension, in that table, you would have a separate line. The next thing that we need to do to make that chart look like the chart that we wanted to achieve is to change the colors of these two divisions. In order to change the colors, we're going to go to formatting, and then we're going to go to data colors, and then we're going to pick green for green. Oops, try it again. And then we're going to pick red for red. And now we have a chart that resembles the chart that we're trying to build to begin with. Let's take a look at the third chart we're trying to build. And you can see that this chart looks a little bit different. So previously, you could see that as I mouse over, we see individual date. And in the date column, we have individual days. In this chart, however, we have our years and quarters, right? So let's talk about how we're gonna achieve this chart. So the first thing that we are gonna try to do is we're gonna try to grab a year and pull it into the axis, and let's see what happens. What we see right away is something silly happening. you're seeing that our years are going not in a chronological order. The reason this is happening is that Power BI is trying to order this data not by year chronologically, but rather it's trying to order things by revenue. So in order for us to fix that, what we need to do is we need to help Power BI understand that it needs to sort things by years instead. The way we do that is we click on More Options, we go to Sort By, and you see the yellow bar indicating the default sort order for now. So right now it says ascending descending from highest to lowest and by revenue. So we're going to click on year. Okay, now it's going to click by year, and we're going to go and click it ascending. So now we have our years going in an ascending order. Now that we have our beginning of the chart, I wanted to introduce another interesting thing. So let's do a quick experiment. Let's grab our charts on one of its sides and try to size it. And you could see that eventually, as I'm sizing it, the chart is starting to not look very useful for us. For example, we have the slide bar introduced. So there's something going on with this chart. Let's try to do this on this chart, on the first chart. And you could see that as I try to slide it, this chart is still pretty meaningful. Right? So we could see the same trend on the chart regardless of the size of the chart. So let's talk about why these two charts behave in a different fashion. As it turns out, let's click on this chart, click on the formatter, and go into the x-axis. You see that we have two types of the chart. We have continuous and categorical. What this does is continuous assumes that all the time values in the time range selected are continuous. So it's gonna skip the data elements that are not important in order to show the overall trend. So you can see that the level of detail is changing on the chart as I resize it. If I click on this other chart and go to X and type, you see that this is categorical. The reason it's categorical is because it's gonna try to display every single value for the data point. So in our case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So as I slide it out, you could see that it's trying to point all 5 data elements every time. And if I make it too short, then it's going to introduce a slider, but will always show all of those data elements on the page, on the chart. So we just need to be aware of that behavior of trend charts. Let's see what we need to do next. Looks like this chart, the title says quarterly revenue trend, so we need to change that, and we also need to introduce the concept of the quarter, and we only have 2 years trend in this chart. So let's see if we can implement that. So let us bring the quarter element into the chart. So what we need to do is we need to find the quarter in our date table and pull it in below the year. We can see right away that the chart did our resorting trick again. So we're gonna sort everything by year and make sure that it is ascending again. And now we also see a bunch of new options available at the top of the chart that we didn't see before. If I click on the first chart, you see that there's not a whole lot of options, whereas if I go to the quarterly chart, we see a bunch of errors. So what do these arrows mean? Well, let's go ahead and just click on this one and see what happens. So you see that when I click on it, it turns from no background into having a circular background. And what that does, it changes the default clicking behavior of a cell. So if I click on the cell now, you see that I went from having years here to having quarters. In order for me to drill up, I just click on the arrow pointing up again. Let's contrast this behavior with when this button is not highlighted. So I'm going to uncheck this and click on 2014, and you see that what it does the filtering behavior that we're already familiar with. So it just selects this individual data point. So clicking on this button here effectively changes our clicking behavior from filtering to drilling down. Now let's move over to the third and fourth arrow icons. So when I mouse over the third one, it says go to the next level in the hierarchy. Well, what is a hierarchy? Well, we kind of understand naturally that year and quarter is a hierarchical setup for our data. So some data elements form a natural hierarchy. So for example, if you live in a state and state belongs to a country, and within the state you have a postal code, so then country, state, postal code creates a natural hierarchy. So time is also a similar dimension. So in time we always work from day to week, or day to month, then month to quarter, and quarter then to a year. So, and the way we build these hierarchies is by just stacking these attributes one on top of the other. So the one with the lower granularity goes above the one with higher granularity. So you would have year, then month, and a day in a hierarchy. You would have country, state, and a postal code in a hierarchy. So now let us see what happens if I click on the third arrow. And what happens is instead of seeing just the years, now I see all the quarters. So this chart is actually, this behavior is actually, if you think about it, nonsensical. You would never, so effectively what's happening here, when you are looking at each quarter here, you're looking for a sum of all of the years data for that quarter. So in our case, and then again I drill up by clicking on this arrow, I have 5 years in this analysis. All of those years have quarter one. So if I drill down, this value is sum of quarter one for all of those 5 years. So this behavior is nonsensical. In order to fix this, what we're going to do is we're going to click on a fourth option that says expand all down one level in the hierarchy. And now what we see is, if I mouse over, you will see 2015 Q2, 2015 Q3, and so forth. So everything is ordered by years. Then within a year, it's ordered by individual quarter. Now let's fix the timing. So we said that we only want to see 2 years, and I think we're only looking at 2014 and 2015. So let's make sure that we only have 2 years in this chart. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the chart, click on filters, filters on this visual, not the filters on this page. Click, and then select 14 and 15. And that will get us to the years that we want. And now if I drill down, I have fewer data points, but it still does not look the same way as our chart we're trying to mimic. Turns out to organize our x-axis a little bit better, there is a couple of options, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into the format, x-axis, and find the option that says concatenate labels. So sometimes it's hard to find. We have a lot of options here. So, and sometimes you don't remember in which option, in which folder the particular option is located. The other way to do this is you can click on search and just type concatenate. And then you see that this option comes up. So if I uncheck it, you see that now we have the labels are not concatenating. Each data point, there is Q1, Q2, Q3, and then below 2014 and 15. That looks a lot more, a lot cleaner. Lastly, we want to make this line a dashed line. I believe that's what we had. Yep. So let's see how we could do this. So one of the things about Power BI, because as often as it gets updated, sometimes new options are added to the properties, and sometimes things move from one point to another. So if you can't remember, again, just type line style, and you will find right now in shapes. So we have line style for grid lines. So you see these dotted grid lines. So it says dotted. We could turn it into solid. But what we want to do is we want to turn our line style dotted or dashed. So right now this option lives in shapes. So we're going to click on dashed. And let's see what other options we have in our shapes rather. So again, let's go into our shapes and see what other options we have. We also have an option to show marker. We turn that on, and then here you could specify the marker size and the marker shape. So you could customize it further to make it a little bit easier for an end user to make sense out of this trend chart. Now let's talk about what other charts we could use in Power BI from the default Power BI charts to show a trend. So the fourth chart that we have that we need to build is called an area chart. So let's build one of those. So so I already have it set as an area chart. So what we need to do is drag the date into the axis, and we need to pull in our divisions into legend. Try it again. And now we have an area chart. You could see that it's not drastically different from our default line chart. It doesn't show information that's drastically different from the trend chart, but I suppose if you're trying to see which division was doing better when, maybe it's easier to see it on a chart like this. One of the tricks I wanted to show you is how to apply formatting from one chart to another. So we've done a lot of work in this chart to color our divisions green and red, and I don't want to have to repeat the same work here. So what I could do is cheat a little bit. I'm going to click on revenue trend by division, click on home. Then here we have format painter. Works very similar to how this feature works in PowerPoint. So make sure that the from chart, the one you're going to inherit from, is selected. Click on format painter. Then you see that mouse pointer has changed. It looks like a paintbrush now. Click on the chart that you want to inherit or change, and you will see that now it's going to be formatted the same way as our source chart. Now let's practice some more. We're going to build a stacked area chart. So we're going to click on revenue trend stacked area chart. So by now you should be able to do this quite easily. Date goes into the axis, division goes into the legend. We're going to copy the formatting from one chart into another, and voila, we have a new chart. So what is the difference between this chart and this chart? Well, stacked is the hint. Stack chart helps me see the overall result, where in my initial chart here or chart here, I can only see the individual values, and I have to combine them together to see that, for example, here we have $1 billion and roughly 600 million, so it'll be 1.6 billion total sales on this date. Then when I build a stacked area chart, I can clearly see that I had overall revenue growth, even though my green division was was pretty flat, and then rapid decline in overall performance, driven by the revenue decline in the red division. The next thing we'll do is build a ribbon chart. So you know the drill. Let's quickly pull everything we need into the chart and carry in the formatting. And where this chart is useful, if I'm trying to compare and contrast kind of the leaders and the laggers, right? So for example, here what's interesting is, the green division, so the higher bars are always going to be at the top. So as we see over time, the green division was their leader, but eventually the red took over. And as you play with this, I would encourage you guys to study the tooltips that this chart provides. It'll demonstrate how the rank changes and what's rank number 1, number 2. So there is some interesting insight you could do by just bringing the mouse over different data elements and seeing what the chart will tell you. Lastly, let's talk about some other ways we can show trends in Power BI. So there is a philosophical discussion whether you should be using line charts or bar charts to show a trend, you will see that Power BI allows several options to show trends. So by default, this first chart is using a line chart. If I go ahead and click on the line and clustered column chart, then you will see that my revenue, instead of being in line, it went into column values. I could bring it over into line values, right? So depending on which box my measure I'm trying to trend lives in, it will show either as bar or as a trend. So sometimes you will see, for example, the revenue for current year go into the bars, and revenue for last year is going to go into the line values. So again, I'm not going to get into philosophical discussions as for what makes more sense. I just want you guys to be aware this option is there. Some will argue that bar-based trend charts are not very effective. You guys make the decision for yourself. Just be aware that that option is available. And as you pick one from these two options, just think about what goes into the columns, what goes into the line values, and that's about all you need to do for the trend charts. Let's click on our checkbox just to make sure that we've achieved everything we've tried to achieve. Looks like we're good. So I think we're good for this class, and let's, the next one is the conditional formatting, one of the most fun topics in Power BI.